The recurring themes of transformation and transition that we frequently observe in mythology as a whole, and specifically in depth psychology's own version of mythology, are also prominently seen in fairy tales. Take Cinderella for instance. It presents us with two distinct worlds. On one side, we see a world full of magic, mystery, and excitement, like the ball with the prince, the music, and the chariot. On the other side, we have a world that is ordinary and boring, like Cinderella's everyday life in the cinders. These two worlds are so different that Cinderella, a normal girl, can't go to the magical world, and the royal prince doesn't understand the hardships of human life that could lead to personal growth. However, the transitional reality bridges these two worlds, providing the prince with a connection to the woman he has fallen for, which is none other than the glass slipper. The slipper is just a regular human object, that is a shoe, but also royal and unique. With this special object, the prince, who represents a world beyond normal human experience, and Cinderella, who represents the normal human world, are brought together. The story concludes with the classic happily ever after, indicating that a transitional link has been established, weaving these two worlds together inseparably. Thus, the impact of trauma is overcome. We can see similar things in other fairy tales. In each one, a world of human suffering or innocence is contrasted with another world represented by supernatural powers. These powers are usually introduced by a character like a witch or wizard who casts spells, or a trickster. These characters are usually seen as evil from the perspective of the story's main character, but as we will see, it's not always so simple. Usually, the main character, who is often suffering or innocent, is bewitched by the evil side of the supernatural being, and the story focuses on how to free this character from the spell and turn their sad situation into enchantment, which is what fairy tales mean when they say happily ever after. So to answer our question, fairy tales suggest that the way to heal the divide between human and divine is through a dramatic story. These stories usually start with innocence or suffering, move through a period of being under a spell of battling with dark powers, and end with the main character growing and becoming more positive, leading to enchantment or living happily ever after. In this process, a daemon, either an angel or a demon, plays a key role in what seems to be a universal two-step process. Fairy tales often show a two-step process of healing a break between human nature and divine power, or between one's self and one's ego. This usually comes after a traumatic event. Sometimes the story talks about the original trauma. More often, it starts with the dullness of life after a hinted at trauma that needs healing. In the first stage, a magical character like a wizard, witch, or genie enters a life that lacks excitement. The main character then falls under the spell of this supernatural being and ends up in a place like a tower, a cottage in the woods, or a magical room. Within these transformative spaces, the traumatized ego falls under the spell of the negative aspects of the fundamentally ambivalent self. This stage aligns with the psychoanalytic concept of incestuous identification, an alchemist's notion of the lesser conjunctive, a premature union of two insufficiently differentiated substances, thus highly unstable. The main danger of the lesser conjunctio is that it can be addictive. If it lasts too long, it can lead to what Michael Balint called malignant regression, which is different from benign regression or going back to a simpler state in order to create something new. This first stage seems necessary for the healing process, especially for someone who's been traumatized, but it's also possible to get stuck here. If this happens, then the divine power turns negative and destructive. This is why Freud was skeptical of religion. He saw it as a way to avoid dealing with the difficulties of real life. This does happen often enough, and for a person who's been traumatized, addiction to this lesser conjunctio is a common outcome and a constant risk. This initial bewitchment is a stage of two in one, but it lacks a third element. It's not yet a symbolic or dialectic process. To reach this third stage, a necessary violent sacrifice of the bliss and forgetful of the lesser conjunctio is required. These violent processes that break the spell lead to a sacrifice of the ego's godlike identity and the return of a personal spirit to the body. This dangerous process can either destroy or save. If it's successful, it leads from that lesser to a greater conjunctive, from mystical participation to real living, that is enchantment and authentic relationships. The daemon then transforms and becomes an angel. Or in the other words, the originally ambivalent self is freed from its defensive position as a survival self and assumes its guiding function as the internal principle of individuation. If the process fails, however, the ego stays stuck in the negative energies of the self that is bewitched and is eventually consumed by its negative aspects.